Las Vegas. It's more than just a city. It's a feeling. It's that feeling of excitement when you spot the lights of the strip out the airplane window. It's that feeling of awe as you stroll down the boulevard, taking in the sights and sounds. And it's that feeling of satisfaction, knowing that you're in the greatest city in the world. Over 42 million people from around the world share that feeling every year. And I'm one of them. Taking you to the world-famous Vegas Strip and beyond, my name is Jeff. And this is Jeff Does Vegas. One of the most serene spots along Las Vegas Boulevard also happens to be home to one of the biggest spectacles in the city's history. Of course, I'm talking about the fountains out front of Caesar's Palace and the attempt to jump over those fountains on a motorcycle by the legendary Evel Knievel. During my last trip to Vegas, I had a chance to sit down with Joe Friday from the Evel Knievel Museum in Topeka, Kansas. Joe happened to be in Vegas at the same time as I was, attending the same conference that I was, as he's getting set to launch a brand new podcast all about the life and times of Evel Knievel. Joe and I sat down and discussed Evel's early start in the world of stunt riding. We talked about how he conned his way into being able to jump over the fountains at Caesar's Palace, his career following that failed attempt, and Joe shared some very exciting Evel Knievel Las Vegas related news with me. Please enjoy my conversation with Joe Friday of the Evel Knievel Museum.
I have a business in Topeka, Kansas, where we do a lot of stainless steel specialties, especially in the food business. My specialty was stainless steel, and a guy comes in and says, "Can you polish this bumper for me?" And I said, "I can, but I won't because it's not what I do. I don't do automotive because you got to deal with, you're not just working on somebody's tractor. You have to get the whole story. They pull their phone out and start telling you all about it." So it ended up being, he's really trying to twist my arm. "This is Evel Knievel's bumper." And I say, did Evel Knievel have money? I didn't know Evel Knievel was dead at the time. But it turns out that it was Historic Harley-Davidson of Topeka that needed this restoration work done because they were working on this semi-truck that Evel Knievel had. It's like a circus wagon. If this big red wagon comes to your house or it comes through your town, you know something big's going to happen. So we ended up helping them out, and 100 local contractors helped out. And so we restored this big red truck, and that's how I started to get involved.
Mm-hmm. And so you mentioned like you didn't know Evel Knievel was dead. Were you not an Evel Knievel fan prior to this situation? I mean, I'm sure you were aware of who Evel Knievel was.
Yeah, I was a fan when I was a kid,
Mm-hmm.
but in 1977, Evel Knievel dropped off the map,
right,
for the whole world. And me included, I just quit following him when they quit putting him on the front of the National Enquirer or
right.
whatever. So I hadn't heard that name since 1977.
Right.
I was a fan then, but moved on.
And so, I mean, obviously now you're involved with the museum, so you know the Evel Knievel story intimately. Let's talk a little bit about the Evel Knievel story and share a little bit about his life and his history and how where he started and what he ended up doing.
Okay, so he started in Butte, Montana, where he was born, and started all his shenanigans in Butte, Montana, the motorcycle riding and the hucksterism kind of deal where he started a security business for $30 a month. He guarantees your tavern will not get broke into.
Yeah, one of those kinds of deals. Yeah, okay.
Like you don't pay the $30, well, there's no guarantee your tavern's not going to get broken.
I get it, yeah.
Worked at the mines there, dropped out of high school there. He was a high school athlete, so he was a ski jumper in high school, award-winning, and an amateur hockey player after the Army. In the Army, he was a pole vaulter. So that's where he got to start. Made his way sort of around the country. His hero was Joey Chitwood from Topeka, Kansas, who was a hugely skilled race car driver. He could take his car up on two wheels, go around a track. Took his show on the road. He's got rodeo clowns and everything, and he's jumping over flaming barrels. And Evel Knievel goes and sees Joey Chitwood crash into a wall and says, "That's what I want to do the rest of my life." It's a long story, but his launch into stardom was here in Las Vegas.
Right. So I think people who are Vegas fanatics, or even with a little bit of knowledge about Vegas, have a bit of an idea of the Vegas connection with Evel Knievel. But it was it 1969? Am I getting my numbers right?
Yeah, what's that?
67. So I was close.
Okay, you were really close.
I was really close.
New Year's Eve.
Yeah, New Year's Eve, 1967 into 68. And he decides, prior to that, obviously, he's going to jump his motorcycle over the fountains of Caesar's Palace.
Yeah, he's unemployed at that point. He tried to have a Joey Chitwood circus where he had a little guy come and entertain crowds. If Evel was going to jump over 2 trucks, then Butch Wilhelm would get on his little mini bike and jump over 2 Tonka trucks. If Evel's going through flaming boards, Butch is going through cardboard.
Yeah.
And I mean, as an aside, Butch eventually became an Ewok, and he lived in Hollywood.
Oh, really?
Yeah. But he's unemployed. He's sitting at a bar in Butte, Montana, when one of his buddies says, "Hey, you know, our fellow beautician, I guess they would call it, our fellow beautician is fighting against Dick Tiger. His name's Rick Rouse from Butte, Montana. Is going to fight against Dick Tiger in a boxing match, and it's in Vegas. Let's road trip it." So they pile from the bar into a van to Vegas, where they cannot afford a room at this palatial venue. Jay Sarno has built this $25 million hotel.
Yeah.
Called it Caesar's Palace. It's got the Roman columns, the hostesses dressed like goddesses. They cannot afford to stay there, but they can afford a beer there.
Mm-hmm.
They go into the bar, and one of his buddies, this guy says, his buddy's got great ideas. You know, you could be the draw here. They don't have a Dean Martin like the Sands has. They don't have a Frank Sinatra like the Dunes has. You could do like your wheelies and tricks that you do at home here as a draw for whoever owns this place. So Evel said, the more beer I drank, the smaller these fountains got, until I decided I'm going to jump these fountains. I'm going to call the owner of this joint.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what he did. He called the owner. Could not get past the receptionist, even though he explains, I'm famous. I was on Wide World of Sports for 3 minutes last year. Jay Sarnos is not going to take the call because he tells the receptionist, no more calls from that yahoo. So Evel begins to disguise his voice.
I love it.
Right? Hey, it's Bill Fleming from ABC's Wide World of Sports. I'm calling about this Evel Knievel character that's supposed to jump your fountains on New Year's Eve, making sure you have enough rooms for me and my entire crew. Sarno says, never heard of it. Then, hey, it's Sammy Smith, my boss here at Sports Illustrated, told me to come take pictures of this character, Evel Knievel, jumping over your fountains on New Year's Eve. What time does that start? And then, finally, Evel calls with a lawyer accent. Hello, it's Saul Rosenberg. I understand that you're promoting an event in which my client, Evel Knievel, is to jump your fountains. The only problem is we don't have any sort of contract or agreement for him to come perform at your place. I'm inclined to sue you, as it happens I'm going out of town with another of my clients. You may have heard of Lawrence Welk. But Evel Knievel is in Las Vegas and available to meet with you tomorrow. So by then, Sarno is going... I
love it.
Yeah, Sarno goes from never heard of it to call me back to... Where you been, kid? I've been looking all over for you.
Yeah.
So that was the beginning. That's the beginning of the Caesar's Palace story. Mm-hmm. Later, Evel fessed up to it, and he and Jay Sarno became close friends.
Yeah.
But at the time, that's how he got the gig for very little money, like $1,000 on New Year's Eve and $1,000 on New Year's Day. Mm-hmm. And then Sarno said, I'm not covering your hospital bills either. So, Knievel Rex, just spoiler, I guess it's not a spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert, it happened.
Spoiler alert, 1968.
1968, but, spoiler alert in case you're been living under a rock since then. Yeah, it did not go well for him on this jump by any stretch of the imagination. Went very badly.
Went very badly.
Very badly.
Yeah. He hit the top of a van, the very last van, cleared most of the fountains. I mean, he did clear the fountains, but as he said, I never had a problem jumping a motorcycle. It was always the landing.
Right.
broke both wrists, both ankles, his hip, his pelvis, and femur.
Yeah.
And was rushed to the hospital. Meanwhile, Sarno, the owner of the hotel, is watching from the portico chair. It's a great vantage point, but he's got these two little kids with him, his kids, his two sons. And they both thought they saw a man die.
Right.
And Sarno says, no, Mr. Knievel was alive. I could see him speaking as they loaded him into the ambulance. But to reassure you, I will take you to the hospital and show you that Mr. Knievel's okay.
Yeah.
It takes him 20 minutes to get from his office to his car, which normally takes two minutes.
Right.
But it's so crowded, and Sarno starts scratching his head thinking, wow, this place is so packed, it's taking me this long, and I've still got this clown signed for a second jump.
Right.
It may not be tomorrow, but he's contractually obligated to go and do it. They get to the hospital. Knievel is awake, alive, and alert, flirting with nurses, but in a lot of pain.
Right.
And he says, Jay, thank God you're here. You got to get me out of here. I don't have insurance.
Of course. Right. Of course.
And Jay Sarno, you've known Jay Sarno's story.
Yes. I mean, very, very famous, developing Caesar's Palace and Circus and heavily involved in the development of Las Vegas in the somewhat modern resort area. He would have been, to compare him, he almost would have been the Steve Wynn of that era of Las Vegas.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Like from frontier town to mega resort. Almost.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Anyways, the point is that he's a super mind when it comes to marketing. Mm-hmm. And he says, don't worry, kid, I will cover your hospital bills if you roll with me on this marketing plan, because you're coming to jump again as soon as you get out. But you got to heal up first, so I'm going to pay off the nurses to speak to nobody. I'm going to pay off the doctors to hold a press conference in their white lab coats, which they do. And the doctor stands out front and says, yes, Evel Knievel is alive in our hospital, and we are assured that he is going to try again as soon as he awakes from his coma.
Just the ultimate level of P.T. Barnum-ish showmanship, right? Like, really.
He is. Both those two characters.
Yeah.
I don't know how this town survived both of them on the town at the same time.
That's outstanding.
He never did end up doing the second jump, but that is what launched his career, that press conference, because it not only ran in Butte in Las Vegas, but it ran in Kansas City and New York and Dallas and Chicago. This crazy maniac crashed and almost killed himself, and he's fixing to do it again.
Yeah. Well, and he went on after that. Like you say, that was the jump that really launched his career, because he went on from there. And it was, he did further jumps, and he was, bigger jumps and bigger paychecks. And of course, then came endorsements. And all of a sudden, this is a guy who is on lunchboxes, and he's action figures, and it's millions of dollars in endorsements that he's getting as well.
The cash cow was this toy. I don't know. I'm not sure if you're old enough yet, but if you're old enough, but there was a toy when I was a kid that outsold Barbie in 1974. It's the first action figure made after a living, breathing human being, and that's the Evel Knievel stunt cycle.
Right.
Wind it up. It's got a little gyro in it, and it takes off, and it really works. It was one of those toys that actually worked as advertised.
Yeah.
And he made more money off of that toy than he did any events or television or movies or jumps.
Yeah. Yeah, I've seen videos recently, because there's the odd time somebody will score one of these things off of eBay or in an antique store that still works, and you see the video of them, and they're just winding it up, and you watch it. And yeah, like, it actually does work really well, the way it should work, as opposed to so many of those other toys that, they didn't work like that. This really, you could set it up to jump over stuff, is fantastic.
So fun. And all started here in that hospital bed.
Yeah.
He had called Wide World of Sports, which is eventually turned into ESPN, but Wide World of Sports was on one day a week, and said, I'm jumping over the fountains at Caesar's Palace, come cover me. And they said they declined. We've already got a schedule, but maybe if you take some footage, we might use it if you send it to us.
Right.
So he hired private contractors, John Derrick, who's more famous for marrying Bo Derek, and his wife at the time was Linda Evans, who's famous for Dynasty.
I think Dynasty, yeah.
And they took the footage of this, this amazing footage, which is kind of like the agony of defeat now, but at the time had it developed, dropped it off to be developed in Los Angeles, where they lived, went camping for a week because that's how long it took to develop the film, and returned. The developer hands him this canister and says, I have done Oscar work, and this is the best footage I have ever seen in my entire life. And they rushed it to Las Vegas, screened it on Evel Knievel's hospital room wall there, and it's Evel Knievel head over tea kettle, just looks exactly like a rag doll, and his bones are breaking, and you can see it. And even though it's black and white, and even though it's old footage, it still makes one cringe to look at. And of course, when he saw it for the first time, his eyeballs turned into little dollar signs, and he said, man, I'm going to take that on Joey Bishop and Johnny Carson. And if people don't want to come watch me make a jump successfully at their state fair, they sure don't want to miss it when I die there. Right?
It was almost like him failing that jump really kind of was the best thing that ever happened to him.
So true. Right? So true. So true.
And the fact that, what still blows me away to this day is the fact that, he pitches it to Wide World of Sports, and they're like, no, you know what? Get back to us if something exciting happens. Something exciting really happened.
It
right?
did.
That's so cool. And so to this day now, there's been a lot of, to follow up on that, as you say, he never tried the jump again. He never attempted the Caesar's Palace jump again. Was that a choice? Was it his choice? Do you know if it was a choice by Caesars, or was it just he never got around to it, or Caesars wasn't willing to let him nearly die again? Like, how come that never happened?
Yeah, I think that was probably Evel Knievel that did not hold up his end of the bargain on that contract. And the reason I say that is because you did a special on Caesar's Palace and stunts there.
Yeah.
And they did let other people do it. They let Robbie Knievel do it, and they let Travis Pastrana do it.
Yeah.
And Gary
Wells tried it, too. He also spectacularly failed as well. So, it didn't go well for a lot of people.
That's true. Yeah.
And so, the connection, the Evel Knievel connection to Vegas continues today. There's a fair bit of history, particularly, I'm assuming you've been down to Evil Pie on Fremont Street.
Yes, Evil Pie.
Which, of course, is run by the estate of Evel Knievel. And if you've never been there, it's such a cool little joint, just jammed with Evel Knievel memorabilia. It's a fantastic place to go. Yeah. The first time you ever went in there, was it just kind of like, this is awesome?
Yeah, that's the first time I was in there. I was like, this is awesome. This is awesome. By then, I had already worked at the Evel Knievel Museum in Topeka. So, it was less awesome than the museum in Topeka, but they had some stuff.
But do they serve pizza at the museum in Topeka?
No.
There you go. That's what wins it.
Well, Jeff, you haven't been there, but the barbecue at the museum.
There we go.
Really good.
Let's talk about the museum. So right now it is in Topeka, Kansas, which seems kind of random in my brain. I'm assuming there's a reason it's in Topeka.
I hear you.
Yeah.
It is sort of random, but that's where we're from. And that's where Mike Patterson's from. And he befriended a really great guy, Latham McKay, who was the collector of Evel Knievel paraphernalia. If it was Evel Knievel, he was and is on a mission to get it. Starting with a pair of leathers, and then Latham looked around to see where the Evel Knievel Museum was, and there wasn't one. So Latham just went out and collected a lot of different things, motorcycles and helmets and jewelry, canes, capes, and had a traveling exhibit for a while. Okay. Eventually ran across this big red circus wagon that I was telling you about. Right. And it was rotting away in a lot in Florida, and Latham didn't really know where to get it restored. He had tried a place or two that just couldn't get started. And Jeff, it was dilapidated. You could see sky through the cab of the Mack truck. And was friends with the Jerry Lee Lewis family from Memphis, Tennessee.
Okay. Yeah.
And historic Harley-Davidson of Topeka, that's their specialty. Not to repeat words, but it's pretty self-explanatory. They specialize in the historic restoration of Harley-Davidson.
Right.
So if it says Harley-Davidson, whether it's 1906 or whether it's 1940, whatever it is, Mike's going to make sure that gets restored to as pristine as you can pay for. That's how it started. Lathan called Mike and said, "Hey, I've got this Mack truck that was owned by Evel Knievel. Can you restore it?"
Yeah.
But what Mike hears is blah, 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 Evel Knievel, blah, blah, blah.
Right.
Mike's like, yeah, bring it.
Yeah.
So this motorcycle now is in the business of restoring a big tractor trailer with a coach and it's a Mack. It's a 1974 Mack truck, I think.
Yeah.
So it took a couple years, and it took 100 local contractors, and as I said, I was one of them. But Goodyear Tire was another one, and it's all painted like a motorcycle. So all the old decals all the old logos are replicated in hand painted design instead of logos.
That's awesome.
Anyway, far too big for the traveling museum,
Right.
and so built a 13,000 square foot museum there so that people could enjoy Lathan and Mike's collections.
That's awesome. And so now the plan is, this is kind of very cool, and this is how you and I sort of connected and talking about Las Vegas and Evel Knievel. The plan is the museum is coming to Vegas.
Hot damn.
That is so cool. So let's talk a little bit about that. You guys have a location in mind? You have a timeline in mind of when people are going to be able to start visiting the Evel Knievel Museum in Las Vegas?
Yes to the first part and no to the second.
Okay.
So, yes, there's a place, and it's in the Arts District, which is between the Strip and downtown.
Right.
Fremont. And the Arts District is an up-and-coming spot. Everybody I've talked to here in Las Vegas this week is super excited about the Arts District. I have not been there yet.
Yeah.
But they've got First Fridays, and it looks hugely crowded.
It's a real booming area in the city, and as you say, it's with lots of great restaurants and lots of great new real estate and lots of great new apartments and condos and living space, and it is the hot spot for people to be going to in Las Vegas right now. That is where everybody is starting to go, is into the Arts District. So that's an outstanding spot.
Good. I didn't pick it. The team picked it. But yeah, it sounds great, and they've got a new punk rock museum going in there, just down the street.
Yeah. And
I don't know what other, but there are other museums there. Burlesque Museum.
Yeah, the Burlesque Hall of Fame is down in there. I've had them on the podcast. I've yet to go through, but I've had them on the podcast to talk about the history of burlesque in Las Vegas and the Burlesque Hall of Fame. And yeah, like it's a real growing area, and that location, being near Fremont and being downtown, but also being sort of within easy access of the Strip, that's a great spot. That's a really good spot for that to be. That's going to be excellent.
Topeka's been really kind to us.
Yeah.
But Vegas, I mean, come on. That's where it belongs.
Yeah.
Nobody could argue that it should be in Topeka, Kansas.
Right.
Instead of Las Vegas.
And so now something that you've branched out into, and that's why you're here in Vegas this week at this conference. Everybody comes to Vegas to go to a conference. You're here, Podcast Movement Evolutions, learning how to get into the podcast space. You are launching an Evel Knievel podcast, which I think is super cool. What made you want to jump into the podcast space with this?
Well, we've been talking a lot about marketing with to coincide with the opening of the Evel Knievel Museum here in Las Vegas, and podcasting is one of those things that I hadn't thought about in the last decade. But what I had thought about is I want to share these stories. People come in there, and a lot of people have a story about Evel Knievel, and a lot of them are getting up in years. Our mission is to preserve and present the legacy of Evel Knievel. So I wanted to get the stories of, say, the driver for Evel Knievel, of this big red truck, because he's got great stories, whether he's telling them or not.
Yeah.
But I was walking around at this conference,
We do for those listening to this episode of the podcast, we're doing the air quotes around conference.
But you and I went out to watch bands play.
Monday, it was a Monday's Dark. Yeah,
which was freaking awesome. And so it's mostly sitting in a dark room, listening to loud music, and probably about 15 minutes of socializing.
Yeah.
And I met John Katz.
Yeah.
Or you introduced me to John Katz, who said, my uncle was the owner of Biceres Erie Cranes. And I'd heard that name. I'd seen the name on the cranes that did the Sky Cycle. But this is an example of one connection. Mm-hmm. Then I'm at the bar, and this girl sees my jacket and says, Evel Knievel, my dad did all his jewelry for Evel Knievel and all Sammy Davis Jr.'s and all Frank Sinatra's. And he did the TCB for Elvis, and his name is Mordecai. So I'm texting Mike from the museum saying, hey, dude, we're getting gold for this podcast if I can get these people to come on.
Yeah.
And he says, how are you making all these connections, right? I said, just wear the jacket.
Yeah.
Just wear the jacket. People come up and they've got stories.
Yeah.
So I've got some in the bank for editing still.
Sure.
But the biographer of Jay Sarno.
Is that David Schwartz?
David D. Schwartz.
Yeah. I've had Dave on a couple of times to talk. We talked about because he wrote a book about the Sands and the history of the Sands, and so I had him on to talk about that, and then he also joined me to talk about family friendly Vegas. Because he wrote a bunch of stuff. He was involved in some panel discussions, I think they were hosted at the Mob Museum, about the family-friendly era of Las Vegas. And so that's great that you were able to get David on to talk. That's great. Yeah.
Then we've got a couple others. Just as a preview of our podcast, Eddie Langert invented the metal golf driver. They were called woods before that. He used a 3-wood. But he invented it for weather purposes. He was a golf pro in Wisconsin. And it turns out these metal drivers could nail a golf ball a really long ways. Invested his life savings, mortgaged his house to build 16 prototypes, took them down to Florida, couldn't get any traction, couldn't get any buy-in. I mean, this sport's 500 years old. Nobody's buying metal woods clubs. And ends up on a golf course where Knievel tries to hustle him. It's a long story. You'll have to listen to the podcast. But Evel ends up buying into this metal golf club. This guy had traveled from Wisconsin with $22 and 16 clubs, ends up getting 6 of them into the PGA tournament that weekend, and sells $2 million worth of clubs that weekend.
Jeez.
From $22 to $2 million.
Wow.
With a little help from Evel Knievel.
Yeah.
And then George Sadlak was Evel Knievel's painter. He's going to be on. And then hopefully we can get Lathan and Mike on. Yeah, it's been fun. So I've got a few recorded. I've got most of those edited, not released yet. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to come to this conference first so I could, get tips and tricks on how to get those things uploaded and what the best ways to market that. Mm-hmm. Now that we're done with, I would guess I'm going to go home and see if I can get it launched.
In the meantime, if people want to learn about the Evel Knievel Museum and they want to hit Topeka, Kansas, how can they do that? You guys are online. You've got social media, of course.
Yeah, both of those things, social media and online. So the online is evelknievelmuseum.com. Mm-hmm. That's a great way. I mean, it's fairly static, but it's the very best place to buy Evel Knievel gear. Mm-hmm. And the Evel Knievel gear I'm talking about is not cheap keychains, sorry, but it's expensive, well-made clothing and historic replicas of his canes, and really good stuff. Mm-hmm. So there's that. But then online, there's Facebook and Instagram and all that stuff.
Yeah. Well, I wish you all the best with all of this. I think it's going to be excellent. I'm looking forward to the launch, and I'm looking forward to having something new to check out when I come to Vegas.
Yeah, right on.
Excellent. Joe, thank you so much for this.
Happy landings.
And that wraps up another episode of Jeff Does Vegas. If you've got feedback on this episode of the show, or any other episode for that matter, or you've got suggestions and ideas for topics you'd like me to cover on the podcast, please feel free to reach out to me via Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram at Jeff Does Vegas. Or drop me an email directly at jeff@jeffdoesvegas.com. In the meantime, thank you so much for checking out the show. Be sure to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you'll know the moment new episodes are available. And don't forget to visit jeffdoesvegas.com for past episodes and show notes. My name is Jeff, and this has been Jeff Does Vegas, a Walker New Media production.